Today, I'm going to talk about what I believe to be the hardest part about innovation, tackling the unknown. I believe so much in this aspect of innovation that if you get good at it, I consider it a superpower. And my hope is that after hearing about navigating the unknown, you'll see how it unlocks everything on the path of going from idea to impact. I'm talking about alignment, decision-making, and securing buy-in along the way. I've had the privilege of working on innovation from many different corners over 25 years. I've been a catalyst of change at McDonald's and Volvo after periods of drought when it comes to innovation. I've worked at an innovative company like Amazon, where you have a founder-led culture. And I've also led a $10 billion P&L as the president of MGM Resorts, where our company had flatlined and we were looking for growth. So what's the common denominator? The common denominator is that behind the promise of any new idea or opportunity is the realization that there are often more questions than answers. So what do we do about it? That's what I'm going to touch on. But first, let me touch on some high-level assumptions about the world in which we operate. I believe three things are common pretty much for all of us. First is that the value add that our companies are looking for from us requires us to navigate new territory. Second, new territory involves ambiguity and uncertainty at the start. Those aren't necessarily bad things as long as we can be constructive about them. And third, that to overcome ambiguity and uncertainty requires a little bit of a brain trust. It's like having a brain trust one issue at a time and getting that brain to flow. I think when you work on team level problems, you'll get a feel for what I'm saying, but obviously it's easier said than done. So how does it work in practice? Well, I'd ask us all to reflect on the question of how much time do we spend on how we're working versus what we're working on. So let me clarify that a little bit. Of course, what we're working on is the specific idea or problem that we're trying to solve. When it comes to the how, I'm referring to how we're navigating through complexity and uncertainty and ambiguity along the way, and navigating the way in which things get done in companies. I'm talking about project kickoff meetings, alignment sessions, and decision points. How do we bring that all together? And I ask you to reflect, how much time do we really spend on the how versus the what? And what you're looking at in this slide are some of the common pitfalls that occur when we don't pay enough attention to the how versus the what. I think on the left side you see some of the common things that may be familiar in group level problem solving that you're working on. And we shouldn't be surprised if these the outcomes are underwhelming. And sometimes, in fact, they are. So my key point here is that really the how is a rate limiting factor for the what. And I know that to be a fact because I lived through this in practice. So what if there was a better way? What if there was an operating system, so to speak, to navigate through the unknown and help us go from a bunch of ambiguity and fits and starts and initiatives to confident decision making? There is a way forward on this, and I urge everybody to focus on a systematic way of approaching these situations as opposed to leaving it to chance or personality. So let's dive into what that actually looks like in practice. And the heart of the system I'm proposing involves solving for these things that you'll see here. Now, to go back to my personal journey, as I mentioned before, I came into companies at very pivotal times where they really needed more ideation and more innovation to grow. So I'm going to circle back to one case, which is Volvo Cars. What you're looking at here is Volvo's tech strategy in 2017. Now, I think they're in a different industry perhaps than you, but every company has this pyramid chart, right? Where you basically have your strategy and mission at the top, you break it down into strategic pillars, and then perhaps some key initiatives underlying them, right? And these pillars, the charts, what I find interesting about these charts over the years is I actually find them to be pretty stable, Meaning when I look back at strategies of companies over time, I actually find that what we put down on paper at a high level seemed to make sense, and it actually lasts for a good 5 to 7 years. Now, whether or not these initiatives get into the marketplace and get in the hands of customers is a whole other story, and that's about how collaboration takes place in companies. It was a very similar situation for me when I joined McDonald's. As the moderator mentioned, I was the first CDO, not at McDonald's, but actually in the history of the Fortune 500. And I made that move coming in from Amazon. So I joined McDonald's, and the story is that sales had flatlined. And at McDonald's, that's not a very good thing. They're used to growing. In fact, it was the first time in 20 years they had negative comp sales growth. So the urgency was there in terms of doing something about digitization as a way to grow the company. I was in front of the board of directors within 45 days of joining, and basically my pitch was, this company is about 3 things: taste, value, and convenience. I can't do anything about the first 2, but I can help you with that 3rd pillar of convenience. And we're going to use technology to usher in a new era of convenience for McDonald's. And it looked something like this in terms of a strategic direction. And a few years forward, it worked, and here are some of the results. Now, I'd love to tell you it was a straight line, but it wasn't. Coming in from Silicon Valley, I was like, we have the vision, let's start building. But we were trying to execute new ideas within the context of an execution culture. So when I talk about an execution culture, I mean something that's really optimized for the known commodities. And that is entirely different than the environment you need to navigate through the unknown. And so let's go a bit further into it. What I'm suggesting is that we need what I refer to as an upstream system. And that's the system that makes sense when ambiguity is the norm, when unknowns predominate. We need an entirely different system than an execution one when we're talking about that stage of a bright idea, the upstream part. And to delve further into the upstream, what is that really? So the upstream is where unknowns are sourced, synthesized, and reasoned through to arrive at conclusions that ultimately drive decisions. Now, I know that's a mouthful, and it probably makes sense. I'm going to show you how it works in practice. So the upstream system is really designed to take the unknowns and make us comfortable with them. The upstream consists of 3 components. There's exploration, alignment, and decision making. I'll talk about each one very briefly, but exploration is actually a phase where we make a concerted effort to surface the right input. The input we're looking for is the key considerations and spending the time to get to the bottom of them. Alignment is about bringing together what's been explored to draw conclusions, and decision making is committing to the next necessary action once we have a shared understanding of the problem. Now, that probably makes sense to you at a high level. For example, the idea of exploration before alignment. But why doesn't it happen frequently enough in our organizations? And the answer is because of the human factors. Things like a know-it-all mentality or a fear of the unknown. Those are the human factors. And what I'm here to tell you and let you in on a secret is that if you don't have a workflow, then the human factors will dominate. So we need a workflow to kind of regulate some of the human factors and keep that collective intelligence going in the right direction. So I formulated the idea of a decision sprint, and I'll talk more about it in a second, to really solve for a few key things. And let me touch on a few of them here. One of my favorites is, starting with a problem statement. It sounds obvious, but let's take an example. Let's say you're at Netflix and the CEO says, what should we do about password sharing? Now, you know about the trickle-down effect, right? One person hears, the CEO wants to crack down on password sharing, and you give that mandate to the team. It's very different than if what's communicated is, how should we balance between user needs and the needs of the business? If you give the team those 2 divergent problem statements, I guarantee you they're going to come back with very different recommendations. So crafting a problem statement is the one of the very first things we can do to start to get the team focused on the right direction. So that's one thing. Another one of my favorites is creating a question list. As an executive, people would think that they need to come into a meeting with me with the answers and the answer of what we're going to do. And I was always more interested in the key questions, at least at the start, because I knew that if we had the right questions, we had enough of the right talent to kind of piece the puzzle together on what the direction should be. So I suggest starting with a question list. Now, the power of questions cannot be understated, because questions are a great way to get input from people and allow people to participate. And the other thing is that they're very neutral. So a question formulated in a neutral way is helpful. It's different than skepticism, right? Which is probably trying to kill an idea before it has a chance to take off. And so developing a great question list is, in fact, very powerful. And then, of course, I'm a big fan of exploration before alignment, because that's the right sequence. If you explore the right things and avoid a rush to judgment, you're probably going to reach a common understanding of things. Usually when there's this divergence in companies or misalignment, what you find is that people are working from the wrong assumptions. So now you have to back up and go to understand where they're coming from, and that can be solved, but it adds time. In fact, when I arrived at Volvo, I was so tired of this word alignment that I banned it, because it really meant I found a tendency of aligning very quickly without really understanding the problem we're trying to solve or the issues involved. And sometimes when you actually give space for that, the teams come back and say, it's not as hard as we thought, and the upside is big, and the answer is clear on what to do. Now, banning alignment was not the right move, so I changed my approach after a few months, and I decided to redefine it. And what I'm trying to share with you is that a lot of what I share in my methodology comes from real-world experience. I mean, all of it comes from real-world experience on how things actually get done in companies and the collaboration pitfalls. And to help us avoid these pitfalls, these are the mantras that I've sort of come up with. So I bring a lot of this together in Decision Sprint, which is a book I've written, and the main idea is to do a couple of things. One is to accept the fact of life that unknowns are the norm, and not react to it with fear or being cavalier. Both of those are not the right answer. Reacting with fear often leads us to water down the ideas to the known commodities. Then we go ahead and ship something very small and not meaningful. We still spend weeks and months on it. Being cavalier is not the right answer either, because you need to actually confront the hard problems that need to be and the hard issues. And so what I'm suggesting is a systematic way to source and get to the bottom of unknowns, use that to draw the conclusions, and then connect that into how things get done in companies. I'm talking about alignment and decision points, and there is a way to operationalize this all into a workflow. And that's what I'm suggesting in the concept of a sprint. So I hope that gives you a high-level flavor of where I'm coming from and why I think that the unknowns are something that we can actually tackle. But one thing I want to deep dive into a little bit is AI, because I get a lot of questions about the future of work. And I want to talk about knowledge work specifically, because I believe in a future that I affectionately refer to as people and prompts. And let me tell you a little bit more about this. So knowledge work is usually what we use as the label to describe the work that gets done in companies. But a little hidden secret is that much of the work that happens in companies today is less about originating knowledge than administering it. So it's knowledge that already exists, and we're simply applying it over and over again. And the interesting thing about AI is that it's actually very good. It's better than humans at interfacing with existing knowledge. And so I'm suggesting that we need to really upskill and bring our focus as knowledge workers to creating and originating new knowledge that companies need. Now, as I showed you in the previous materials, there's no shortage of need for that in organizations. Every company has their strategy, and that is largely an unknown territory. There's no user manual for how to get there. So companies crave, the ability to originate new knowledge that helps them disambiguate and create clarity around how to get to their initiatives and stand those up and make them successful with a lot of momentum, right? And so there's a vast need for this. And that's why focusing on upstream work is really protecting knowledge workers in a lot of ways against the vulnerability of AI. Like I said, I believe that AI is better than human beings at interfacing with existing knowledge. And that is really where a lot of, I think technology will begin to take on, what roles that we typically have assigned to human. And don't blame the AI for that, please. Blame your company's management teams and boards for, not moving quickly enough, because, the idea that we're simply administering knowledge and that's knowledge work is really an old concept. But there is a huge silver lining here, is that when you get good at upstream work in your role and in your individual work, but also at a team level, that's super powerful. And AI will complement that to speed up things like, for example, suggesting blind spots in your work, help you tighten those up, and a number of other things. I mean, I'm using AI today to craft problem statements to say, okay, let's say you are Netflix or you're Uber and you want to launch a loyalty program. How do I craft the right problem statement? And if I had a question list, are there things that might be missing? Can you suggest things? If I have an answer, AI can even help you point out where you might build in some data or some evidence, or you're making a claim and maybe you need to support it a little better. All of these things are actually going to come together, I believe, over the next 3 to 5 years, and they're going to radically change team-level collaboration around major, key initiatives in companies. So just going up one level to the upshot, the bottom line is that across all my experiences, whether in Silicon Valley startups, Amazon, or in the C-suite of large organizations, I found a common denominator. It's called upstream work. And getting good at it is actually, when you combine that with the right talent, is the key to creating continuous growth in our organizations. And if you want to learn more about that, I encourage you to pick up Decision Sprint. That's the book. I wrote the book in a way where it's kind of like you can apply it right away. In fact, I know a lot of people who kind of pick it up and start to sketch out how they're going to change their collaboration in their organizations to start to get more velocity. So that's one way to do it. And my team and I are also provide services and software through a company called Ritual. It's available at ritual.work, which is a way to stand up some of these workflows. But in any event, it's been a great conference. I really enjoyed all the conversations that we've been having, and thanks for your time this morning.